not accused. He was. Chris kept mentioning Platonism. You're using Platonistic reasoning. I've been reading about Plato. I'm not an expert on him, and Aristotle, and I've heard other people in different contexts. Obviously, with Calvinism, it's Platonistic, Gnostic Manichaeism, and all that kind of thing. There's a bit of Aristotelianism in there. Is there a simple way for me to detect that kind of thing and point out the error of it, or the fallacious reasoning of Platonism in some way?
So what I'm noticing is a bunch of terms being thrown around. So I'm not, I mean, we could talk about what these things are, but if we're talking about where they are, if like Chris Fisher, is that the person you were talking about? If we're talking about what he is seeing, what we really need to do is break those errors down into actionable items. Like let's kind of forget the topic headers of Platonism. I mean, we can keep using it, but for the sake of detecting error, let's identify what the errors are, regardless of how we've categorized them or taxonomized them.
All right.
And then say what's up with this error? Is it an error? Is this a problem? How did this come into Christian thinking? Is it something we should reject? Is it something we should accept? So I think that, like, so far, the level of the conversation has been too low resolution to be actionable, because when you have different ideologies, there isn't one single ideology that has 100% lies in it, nor is there one that has 100% truths in it. So you can't just say Platonism or Neoplatonism or Gnosticism or something like that. Those are very blanket statements, and they don't have a high enough resolution in order to pinpoint exactly what it is we're optimizing for, if we're trying to get truth or avoid error or something like that. We got to get down to the granular level of the specific truths or errors that we're dealing with.
Yeah, because Platonism and Aristotelianism and all that kind of thing, they're very big subjects in themselves, aren't they?
Well, I also think that people throw around words like Plato and Aristotle, like these names, as if they're the same.
Yeah,
and they're not the same. Aristotle is a significant departure from Platonism.
Yeah.
And then what most people think of as Platonism today is really Neoplatonism under Plotinus, which came a while later after Plato. And you could say that Platonism is really an extension of Socrates, because we know what we know about Socrates through Plato.
Right.
And then, Socrates got a lot of his information from Heraclitus, and Heraclitus was the person who gave us the concept of the Logos. Now, if you're familiar with the book of John, it starts off, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So suddenly, when John starts writing, we get this concept of the Logos, which comes from Heraclitus. I've been talking about this with a few people recently, that it's easy for us, especially if we're very moralistic, fundamentalist type Christians, to kind of group all these people in together. But sometimes they're generations apart. Sometimes they're hundreds of years apart. And if you look at the sequence of people from, say, Heraclitus to Socrates to Plato, then to Aristotle, who came after Aristotle philosophy-wise?
Origen?
Alexander the Great.
Oh, yeah.
See, Alexander the Great was Aristotle's pupil. So something happened with Aristotle where there was a departure from what was being handed down, starting with, or maybe not starting with, but from Heraclitus on down. So Aristotle in many ways represents a departure, a very left hemispheric approach, compared to Heraclitus, Socrates, and Plato might be having a more right hemispheric approach. Aristotle goes left hemispheric, and you might call this a departure from what was handed down to him, or an apostasy, even if you want to say it in religious terms, even though I don't think we should moralize it. But then what you have from Alexander the Great is essentially the application of Aristotelian thinking. So what does that bring? It brings power, dominance, outside in, top down. In Scripture, in Colossians, when it's talking about the power of the glory of God, you would think that that would be followed by control and dominance and authority and setting things in order, but it's followed by patience and long suffering and joy. Well, Alexander the Great is the top down, outside in power. He kind of like Agent Smith from The Matrix. Let's go around, let's Hellenize everything. Let's make everything look like us in our image. And let's make the whole world look the same. Let's make them all speak the same language. He's like the Agent Smith. And so when Paul is distinguishing between the wisdom of God and the wisdom of men in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, another way to perhaps look at it is perhaps something like Aristotle and Alexander the Great is more like the wisdom of men, whereas the wisdom of God is this inside out kind of thing. It's this dialogue kind of thing. It's the ability to get along with other people without saying, I'm of Paul, I'm of Apollos. Perhaps the self-sacrificial pattern of Jesus Christ, of death, of order, disorder, reorder, where even though Socrates denies being guilty, he still drinks the hemlock. So you have quite a shift by time from Socrates, by time you get to Aristotle, by time you get to Alexander the Great. And so whereas 1 Corinthians 1 seems to be very much against this, what we would call modernistic, blue, orange, and green, red, blue, orange, and green consciousness levels in spiral dynamics, is so Alexander the Great would be very red in that regard. That's probably the wisdom, if wisdom in quotes, the wisdom of man that Paul is speaking against in this Hellenized culture, whereas he might not have been so much against whatever came from Heraclitus and Socrates, for example. And I'm just putting this out there as a suggestion, as something for people to look into, because it's really easy we tend to think sanctimoniously and moralistically, and everybody who doesn't think like us is evil. So we just clump all these people into one big clump, and I'm not so sure I see it that way. And if I could add one more thing to this, I think it's interesting that Jesus shows up, and he's in Nazareth, which is in northern Israel, and he shows up in the Decapolis, and the Decapolis is 10 cities where they are very heavily influenced by Greco-Roman type thinking. And you'll see people like this language. If you go to the Old Testament, you don't see anybody going up to their leaders saying, what must I do to inherit eternal life? You don't have people going around saying, what must I do to be saved? Or, that kind of thing that you see starting in the New Testament, where people are concerned. They're suddenly concerned with hell. Jesus mentions hell, I think 19 times, if I'm not mistaken. You don't see, or Hades, okay, and then Peter even uses the word Tartarus, which is very interesting, because it's almost like whatever Jesus is doing when he shows up is he's meeting people where they are, and they seem to be very influenced by the Greco-Roman culture and the philosophy of the time, and he does not spend a lot of time negating that, but speaks to them in terms of that many times, because and then also the fact that the parables kind of seem like Zen koans is also very interesting. He's quite a character. Anyway, I think there's a lot to consider, and to start throwing around terms like, how do we get rid of the Gnosticism? How do we get rid of the Platonism? Well, if you're against Platonism because maybe it's pagan, then maybe you're in favor of nominalism, because it's the opposite of Platonism, typically seen that way. But that was started by Chrysippus, who died around 206 BC, which is also pagan. So any way you look at it, you could be called a pagan. Doesn't matter. So associating somebody with a label, or mapping them back to a label that is ostensibly evil, does not necessarily mean that any particular idea is good or bad. So I think it's not super helpful to throw the labels around. It would be more helpful to speak of specific propositional truth claims, if you will, and then evaluate those on their own merits and not commit the genetic fallacy of, classifying them as evil because of where they came from.
Right. Paul would have been very familiar with Plato and some of the other Greek philosophers and all that kind of thing. He debated with the Stoics and the
Epicureans there in Acts chapter 17, verse 18, I believe it is. Me and my buddy were just looking at that earlier today.
Yeah, is Paul specifically dealing with that kind of philosophy at Mars Hill, or because there's no particular details about it? All we know is that they're either Epicureans or Stoics, and I'm sure there'd have been a wide range in between.
Well, that is a wide range. The Epicureans and the Stoics is a wide range. I mean, you're looking at hedonism versus Spock, kind of to give caricatures. Epicurus, he believed he's very hedonic, which is hedonic is what the senses that the body gives you. And so he's very much advocating being in touch with that. Now, the word hedonism gets this rap today. It has the marketing today of just doing whatever brings pleasure, but that's not really how it came across in the beginning. It was more or less an awareness of what the body is feeling. And whereas Stoicism it's kind of like fatalism, but it also had some elements of compatibilism where they see things as happening in a certain way. And the way to have both happiness and meaning in life was to figure out what that flow of the way was and to not get emotionally geared up against it because there's nothing you can do about it anyway. Best thing you can do is figure out what that way is and get in touch with it. I mean, I'm very overgeneralizing here. So, but I'm trying to think in my head what Paul says in Acts 17, where the Epicureans and the Stoics are mentioned, and nothing is jumping in my mind where he is specifically addressing any of their tenets.
All right. So, well, I would say actually, because he addressed the unknown God, didn't he? Plato and Aristotle had a different view of God. I think in Platonism, God has parts, and in Aristotle, he's.
You said in Platonism, God has parts.
Something like that. I can't remember now. Because Chris mentioned it, Chris Fisher.
That's not my understanding per se. I'm not claiming to be an expert on anything that I'm talking about. I need to make that very clear too.
Oh, right.
Just sharing a perspective to the degree to which I'm informed on this, which I do not claim to be very high. So I am not tracking that particular component. Anyway, it would be interesting if we're talking about what Chris Fisher said. It'd be interesting what he is saying is appearing in what is ostensibly Christianity that stems from that.
Well, he is an open theist. I'm not, but I do think that if I was to say to Chris I'm not an open theist, he would probably be able to prove that I am at least open theist in one point, at the very least. I don't know, it'd be very difficult to get away from open theism for any Christian, really. I'm not into being labelled, but I've never liked it, even before I became a Christian.
Yeah, as soon as you start using a label like open theism or what's the alternative, closed theism, you very rapidly get into a place where you can no longer be epistemically humble. In other words, what we want to do, instead of aligning ourselves with a particular label, and so if you've ever debated with a Calvinist, if anybody's listening to this, if you've ever debated with a Calvinist, what you're going to run into very frequently is if you don't see things their way, you automatically get accused of a bunch of things. Oh, you're a universalist. Oh, you're an open theist. You're a Pelagian. They have all these things they map you back to, okay? And that way of interacting is not super healthy. It's not a super healthy way to interact. And even though we disagree with Calvinists, we bring that way of interacting over with us. outside of Calvinism. So we're really making a lateral move ideologically out of Calvinism. We're not going vertically and transcending it. We're not going to the meta. We're just going beside it, which isn't really any better. And so what we would really want to do, in my opinion, is to not try to define or nail down the ontology of God and what his memory storage hard drive looks like or where it's stored per se, because nobody asks those questions.
Yeah.
Let's look at what the text of Scripture says and see what it's telling us, and then ask yourself, do we believe what it says, or do we have a good philosophical reason, like the Calvinists do, to find philosophical reason to explain away what the text says in favor of something that it doesn't say?
Yeah. I think I might have heard you use the expression, this caged mentality, left brain, ideological, propositional thinking.
Yes.
Would you say that is the same with free grace, the so-called theology, whatever they call it?
So yeah, anything that is propositionally normative. Okay. And when I say something's propositionally normative, it's anything that looks like this. Like free grace would love this one. This one over here, I have an assistant today. This is also propositionally normative. And this is propositionally normative. So if you talk to free grace people, they're going to be all about Adam Harwood's systematic theology. They think that's great. And when we say that that's not a good idea, we are not saying that the propositions aren't more sound. Sorry, you can have that back. We're not saying that the propositions are less sound or anything like that. What we're saying is that the systematization of propositions is not a smart thing to do. It's not. We're never encouraged to do that. So like in Philippians chapter 3, right around verse 15 or 16 or so, Paul, when he's about to start signing his letter off, and he says, okay, here's the last bit of advice. He doesn't say, here's the list of things to believe in order to not be a heretic. Never does that. He says, mark them which walk the same way that we walk as an example, and I'm paraphrasing here, and mark them and do what they're doing and follow them. And follow, as you have us as an example, you have them as an example, mark them as an example, and do that. So it's Paul is referencing a way to be, a set of things to follow. He is not listing a bunch of things to believe. Not that Christianity does not entail things to believe, but that's not where Paul's emphasis is. It's kind of like understanding the court dimensions for a basketball court. You need to know what they are, but knowing and believing what they are isn't the end. You also have to play basketball, which is a very different thing than just knowing the facts and the dimensions of the basketball court and the height of the rim and how far out, how many feet out is the foul line, all that kind of stuff.
It doesn't make you a good player, but it does help.
Yeah. So Calvinism versus free grace versus provisionism, they're all, it's almost like they're all disagreements over the dimensions of the court. And we're like, just pass me the ball, bro. Or let's go practice. Let's practice shooting. I had a conversation with somebody earlier today who talked to me about how they passed from what they would call, being in darkness to being awake. And my question wasn't, what are your beliefs? My question is, what did you do? What did you do to make that happen? And we need to get more in the habit of asking that kind of question instead of what are your beliefs? Because at the end of the day, what's the product anyway? I mean, if you're looking at an elite basketball player, for example, if you're talking to Julius Erving or Michael Jordan or Larry Bird, you're not going to say, what are your beliefs? What are your beliefs about basketball? Because that's not going to help you win any games or any championships. You want to understand, what did they do? So when Larry Bird says, well, every morning I went outside and I shot 500 free throws, foul shots. I shot 500 foul shots. That's what I did. Now that's actionable. That's, well, maybe I could do that. Maybe that would help me. So what are you trying to become? and Christianity it's the way. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus is referred to as the way multiple times in the Gospels and in the Acts, and that's the normativity needs to be participatory, perspectival, and procedural, not propositional, not to the exclusion of the propositional, because we have to have that to communicate, but that's not the basis of normativity of the in-group.
So I would say ideologies or a particular, like systematic theology and things like that, limit thinking, don't they? It does seem to do that with Calvinists. It does in some other areas. How do you encourage somebody to break out of that caged mentality? I don't hate free gracers, I don't hate Calvinists, but it's just wrong think, isn't it?
Yeah, we don't hate them any more than we hate second graders. You know, people
No.
say things like, "Well, you've had this Calvinism debate for hundreds of years; it's never going away. Why are you getting involved with it?" And usually, it's Calvinists saying that who would rather not have to deal with the arguments that refute them. But we've had the second grade for hundreds of years. Does having it around mean that we should not promote anybody to the third grade anymore? So saying Calvinism and its entry level exit routes, such as free grace, traditionalism, and provisionism, that sort of thing, it's a lateral exit route, which maybe from there you can make a vertical move, but those are lateral moves away from Calvinism. They're not vertical moves because you're still ideologically possessed. You're still propositionally normative. So what we want, so that question is like, how do we get people out of that cage stage? If I had the answer to that, my videos would be a lot shorter, and I would have stopped doing YouTube by now.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to get people out of cage stage Calvinism.
Yeah.
At all. But I mean, I get messages every day. Hey, your channel helped me come out of Calvinism. I don't know exactly what it was that did it. I mean, every once in a while you come across someone like Brad Sabb, who was on Leighton Flowers' channel, and he's like, yeah, I listened to Kevin's video on predestination and then the Ephesians 1:4 and Ephesians 1:5 and the chosen thing, and I realized that this is not an emotional thing. We're not talking about God's fairness. We're not talking about free will. We're not talking about the character of God. We're talking about properly exegeting the text. And so for him, that's what did it. But for somebody else, it's something else that does it. And I really think it has more to do with the individual's proximal zone of development and what they need to reach the next rung on their ladder of transformation, more so than a systematic paintbrush, broad brush kind of one size fits all approach. I don't think there is a one size fits all approach.
Right. It's just occurred to me actually that I'm not having a go at free gracers. I can't think of like being
what was that sentence again? What about free gracers?
Well, what about? I mean, I think being free grace or charismatic or whatever, giving yourself a label is a way of escaping other labels that you definitely don't want, like Catholicism and word faith and all that. And so they go with a different ideology because it best fits what they're thinking or something like that.
Yeah, we did some. Yeah, we did some analyses of free grace and provisionism on the on Beyond the Fundamentals channel. And what's unfortunate about free grace and provisionism, and I think we documented this more so with provisionism, but that it is framed in terms of not being Calvinistic. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the problem with that is that you wind up not realizing how many premises you still share, how many false premises you still share with them by the time you're finished refuting them within those boundaries. So what is the proper scope of the boundaries at which point somebody should transcend Calvinism? And what I'm trying to say, I think, is that provisionism and free grace, even though they would hate to hear me say this, the boundaries are still too narrow, and there's too many premises still shared in common with Calvinism that need to be realized and let go of before the person can really let go and move on. So I find in myself, I don't know about every day, but on a regular basis, I find premises that I'm still holding on to that are really Calvinistic premises that have kind of seeped their way into standard Orthodox Christian teaching over the centuries, and it gets taught by non-Calvinists everywhere. And so I find myself still to this day letting go of some of those. And just, just I was just listening to one of my older videos on 2 Timothy chapter 2, and I was showing how the passage refutes Calvinism and all this. And I was listening and I was just cringing. And I think it's just from a couple or 3 years ago. I don't remember exactly when it was, but like I would not say those things now. I would say things very differently now. So just in 3 years, 4 years, however long ago it was when that video came out, my perspective has changed so much that I would not say any of those things again. Those things came out of my mouth. So
Yeah.
I don't want to stop and codify any of my current beliefs at any time into something like this, because once you do that, you start defending them, then you become egoically attached to them, and then you put a stunt on your growth and you can never move past them. So we need to constantly be in the process of realizing how many premises we share with ideologically possessed mindsets and be ready and willing to let them go all the time, at any time, to whatever extent is necessary.
Right. What kind of premises? I don't want to get you in trouble with the Free Gracers or the Calvinists or anybody. I'm just
Okay, premises like, what is God? How do we define God? Is God a person? Is God okay? If we're in the image of God, do we envision God like a Hebraic Megazeus kind of character? Is he a person with a body and a brain? Okay, is God omniscient? Where's all that knowledge stored? Is it stored in a brain that's kind of like ours, or God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth? If God is not embodied because he's a spirit, we're talking about God the Father here, then where is all that memory stored? Where is it physically? And how is it accessed? Okay. What are some more premises? What does the word salvation mean?
good question.
So salvation.
It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yes. So when we have been programmed to think of salvation as some kind of guarantee that you will go to heaven when you die, or some kind of mechanism that gets you to heaven when you die, something like that, right? And we have all these doctrines for that salvation. To when does it occur? Do you have it in having mode? And then can you lose it? All that sort of stuff. So if somebody is arguing whether or not you can lose your salvation or whether you can't lose your salvation, they're on two sides of the wrong coin, because what if that isn't what if that isn't what Paul has in mind when he's talking about salvation? The word salvation comes from the word salve, salve, salve. So to be saved is to be salved, is to be healed, and it's to be delivered from some kind of infirmity. Okay, so somebody put in the comments right here, to be saved from sin and the penalty of sin, right? I don't know if you see Kevin's biblical discussions down there, and that Kevin is not me, by the way, and nothing against him. It's just to distinguish, that's not me. Our work called Beyond the Fundamentals. So if you were to say, okay, to be okay, that's going. Okay, so he answers that, to be saved from sin and the penalty of sin. Well, let's stop at to be saved. And then what does that mean? Well, if the word saved is salved, like salve, you put a salve on a salve, a healing ointment, it means to be healed. So to be healed from sin and the penalty of sin, when? For how long? Why? How? Okay. And it turns out that many places where the word saved shows up, it is not a reference to eternal salvation of the soul. For example, at the end of 1 Timothy 4, so shalt thou save thyself and them that hear thee. Well, people see that word saved, and what we need to ask, instead of like our buddy Kevin here said, to be saved from some, we need to ask the hermeneutical question: saved from what? Healed from what? Delivered from what? Or like Jamie says, what is a soul? And to what degree? Healed from what? Okay. And so in 1 Timothy 4, I think it's verse 16 off the top of my head, they are being saved from deception, from the deception that's mentioned earlier in the chapter. They're not being saved from hell or from sin, or like sin in general, even though deception is a particular sin. And it's not the salvation of the soul that sends them to heaven. It's a particular healing or deliverance from a specific deception that's mentioned in that chapter. So every time I see the word saved, I want to ask the question, from what? Well, in that context, it's not the salvation of the soul. Well, the translators, and I'm trying not to use the word stupid here. So the translators of the NASB, when they saw that, they're like, that's not good doctrine. So in Departure, from every single extant manuscript, they changed the grammar there. Instead of so shalt thou save thyself and them that hear thee, they change it to something else. Let me see what it says.
Share screen if you need to, Kevin. No problem.
Let me go to 1 Timothy. I think it's 4:16, and let me make this bigger. Okay. Okay, and now let me see if I can figure out how to share my screen. Present. Share my screen. Sharing screen is easiest with two monitors. Let me see what else I got up here. Entire screen. Now we're going to go with screen number 1. Okay. Let me get rid of this. So what if I compare these, and I'm sorry if that's too small, I might be able to make this a little bigger. If I'm in 1 Timothy 4:16, over here, let me make that a little bit smaller so I can see it better. Okay. On the King James, you have, take heed unto thyself and unto the doctrine, continue in them, for in doing this thou shalt both save thyself and them that hear thee. Well, that's very bad doctrine. We don't want that. So the NASB, if you go over here to this one where my mouse is, for doing this, you will ensure salvation for both yourself and for those that hear you. There is no Greek manuscript anywhere that has the word ensure in it. They just added that because they think they're changing the doctrine. Well, if you look at the context, we're not talking about saving your soul from hell. We're talking about delivering people from a particular kind of deception that's mentioned in the chapter, right? So if we have that problem in that verse, and then Acts 2:40 is the same way. It says, take heed. It says, save yourselves from this untoward generation. Well, that's bad doctrine. You can't save yourself. But what Peter has in mind isn't the salvation of the soul. It is deliverance from the armies. When Jesus says, when you see Rome compassed about, Jerusalem compassed about with the armies of Rome, that kind of thing, Luke 21, Matthew 24, then you better, get out of town, because they're going to come in there and they're going to kill everybody. And that's exactly what they did in 70 AD. They were crucifying all the Jews in Jerusalem at the rate of 500 people per day. And so Peter remembered Jesus saying this. And so when Peter says, save yourselves from this untoward generation, he's not saying save your soul from hell and send it to heaven. He's saying deliver yourself from being one of those people that are being crucified at the rate of 500 per day when Titus shows up. because that's what's coming, because Peter did his homework. He was paying attention to Matthew 24, and he's kind of delivering a similar kind of message. That's what's coming to Jerusalem, and he knows it is. So those kinds of things. So just in two passages, we see the word saved or salvation means something other than the doctrines of salvation that we have in books like this. Okay? So if I take the doctrine of salvation in a book like this and I impose it onto every appearance of the word salvation or saved, then I am eisegeting the text. I'm reading an idea into the text which isn't there and is actually in opposition to what the text says. So those are to answer your question, those are a couple of premises. And what I have found, and we don't have to get any more of these because I'm in discover mode. And when you're in discover and explore mode, and you're trying to be epistemically humble, you're not exactly coming up with well-formed ideas that would do good in a debate necessarily. Okay. And so for me to put out in public on YouTube exactly where I am with some of this would not be, I don't know, it would attract a lot of hate and anger and sanctimonious moralistic attacks, because it seems like everybody in the YouTube comment section these days is 100% just like 1 Corinthians 3 and 4. There are divisions among you. I'm of Paul, I'm of Apollos, and you are carnal, that kind of thing. Everybody's fighting about something all the time. They can't just stop and say, let's slow down and let's stop being moralistic about this. Let's try to figure out what this is really saying. And the truth is, because we've been taught these premises for so long, we really don't know what it's really saying. So let's have a little charity with each other. Let's try to use Rule Omega and Protocol X, as we have videos about those on the channel, and slow it down, figure out what this stuff is, and stop building systems like free grace and provisionism where we don't know what this stuff is in the first place, because we haven't sussed it all out. We haven't identified all of our premises, that sort of thing.
So do you want to answer some questions from the side chat if anybody's got any, Kevin?
yeah, go ahead. I feel like I'm just running my mouth like crazy.
Kelvin mentions Hegelianism. I can't remember the exact definition. I know what he's on about.
So yeah, this guy, who interestingly has his avatar picture is the Q from Star Trek.
Right.
Hegelianism doesn't work with a cogent gospel expression. So I don't know if he is saying, I don't know if he is saying, I don't know what he's saying. I don't know if he's saying that what we're saying is Hegelianism. And then that's another one of those things like Gnosticism or, Platonism or whatever. Like, are we talking about a Hegelian dialectic? Because a lot of Christians are trained without understanding what a dialectic is at all. They are trained to be against a Hegelian dialectic when they can't even explain what one is. So I don't know what this guy means by this. Psycho Bible says, I'm curious what your guest wanted to discuss. He might be asking that on my channel, not realizing that I'm a guest on your channel.
Oh, right. Well, Hegelianism, obviously a guy called Hegel created that thing. It's thesis, antithesis, and I can't remember what the conclusion, I suppose you could say. I can't remember now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's where you're presented with a thesis and an antithesis, and you come up with some kind of third way that resolves them both. Someone said Hegelian dialectic, and that's Jamie. And Jamie's a jokester. So just about everything Jamie posts, he's got a joke wrapped up in there. So I think he's making a little sarcastic joke that Hegelian dialectic is a Hegelian dialectic, which is kind of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Psychobible comes back and says I was confused. By the way, just a little plug for Psychobible. If you ever get a chance to check out his channel, he's got a great channel over there at Psychobible, where he looks at a lot of issues Christians are facing from a Christian perspective, and he is a certified and licensed counselor, therapist. Very good information over there. So anybody listening, check that out when you get a chance.
Right.
Yeah, and then right under that, he says, correct, I was confused. So I think since I'm also broadcasting this on my channel, he probably thought that you were my guest on my channel, even, but we're just broadcasting your channel back to mine.
Yeah. I'm not keen on this. I mean, I heard a Calvinist say, I think it was last week, it could have been the week before. He said he's a Calvinist, but he doesn't follow Calvin.
yeah, like this guy here. Okay, so Kevin's biblical discussion. Do you want to put that comment back up there? Jamie is a Seventh-day Adventist that follows a false prophet. So what's going on there is, okay, sure, but instead of if we're going to discount everything Jamie says because we can categorize him as a Seventh-day Adventist who's following a false prophet, what we're doing is we're committing a genetic logical fallacy. Is we're saying that whatever Jamie says is false because of who it comes from. Since Jamie is doing something that I perceive to be an error, therefore I don't believe anything he says. Okay. And so so when it comes to Jamie, or even when it comes to Calvin, because he says Calvin was a murderous psychopath. I mean, I agree with that, but it doesn't mean that Calvin said all false things. I mean, Calvin wasn't exactly a huge fan of limited atonement, for example. So just because somebody is associated with something that we don't agree with doesn't mean they don't say true things sometimes. So we need to have a little bit of charity and evaluate what people say for each sentence at a time, separate the signal from the noise on each one of those, and not just dismiss people because of some evil thing we can associate them back to.
Yeah. The problem is, I think, if I admit to a Calvinist publicly on YouTube, whatever, that is correct on something, I'm going to get strawmanned by people who absolutely hate and despise Calvinism. I mean,
That's the problem of a rivalrous dynamic in a game theoretic situation, which is not a good place to be. It's not a good place to be in explore mode. It doesn't work.
I don't like to be labelled as a Protestant, even though if I was to give a definition, my understanding of what a Protestant is,
right,
it wouldn't quite be what most people think a Protestant is. Somebody who just rejects Catholicism, as I do. I absolutely reject Catholicism, but I do agree with some Protestantism. I mean, I've heard Jamie Russell talk about Calvinism, and he's pretty sharp on that subject.
Right. And then, but if you say that, somebody's going to say, "Oh, you're a Seventh-day Adventist sympathizer," and people got to get out of that kind of thing. So we're doing a study on Colossians over at Beyond the Fundamentals on Sundays, and what we found when we're comparing Paul's different letters is that there's like a path of growing to where you are ready for wisdom cultivation, and the Colossians have made it through the end of the path to love as a capacity, whereas the Corinthians have not even started that path. And so if the Colossians who are ready for wisdom cultivation were to go back and try to socialize their findings back to the Corinthians, they would just encounter a bunch of negation and disruption and antagonism and rivalry. That's all they would get. So that's the kind of thing we're getting here. Like, so Kevin's biblical discussion says, I never said that he didn't say true things. So what I would advise you to do, Kevin's biblical discussions, is to comment on the things people say rather than what they can be associated with.
I mean, well, I wonder what kind of fallacy this is, Kevin. My authority is the Bible alone. I believe that he believes that. That's why I'm SDA.
If I know Jamie well enough, I think that he's saying, okay, I think he's making a joke here. I think that my authority is the Bible alone. That's why I'm a Baptist. That's why I'm a Catholic. That's why I'm a Presbyterian. I think that he's making a joke by saying this, knowing that anybody from any denomination would say this of their own denomination. And
Yeah.
so Jamie has a let's break the fourth wall type of like a Deadpool kind of humor. So I
Yeah.
think he's saying this kind of in jest, more so than actually lacking the epistemic humility to not say it.
Yeah. I've heard Jamie, as I said earlier, comment on Calvinism, and he's refuted it. He rejects it, and I thought he was pretty brilliant, actually. His insights on it, even though he's SDA. So that doesn't mean he's necessarily ignorant just because he follows Seventh-day Adventism.
Yeah, we need to learn to have charity with people, and if they have something to say and they've thought through something, let's listen to what the content of what they have to say is, and not just accept or reject it because of where they're coming from.
Yeah.
That's categorical thinking, which is the opposite of charitable thinking, and we understand from 1 Corinthians 13 that charity, agape, love, is above faith and hope. So we don't need to be categorically thinking. We
Yeah.
need to be charitably thinking.
Yeah, we don't need. You did a video the other day. I think it might have been a short clip from one of your bigger videos
Mm-hmm.
about that very point. And I thought, yeah, why do you need a statement of faith? He's right, obviously. I thought that always anyway, generally. Why not a statement of agape?
Yeah, why don't
Why,
we
why
like
do we all have to?
if love now abideth these three, faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love, why do all our churches have a statement of faith but not a statement of love? That's a great question. Yeah, I asked the same thing. Let's have a statement of charity, a statement of love,
Yeah,
and see where that goes.
yeah. Now that would be difficult. I've got to say this. And again, I'm not trying to get you in trouble, Kevin. I'm not complaining, whinging. I'm not weeping into my pillow in my flat. I've heard a lot. I've come out with some myself. I've heard a lot of nastiness from these free graces and certain other groups. Frankly, I'm sick to death of it. I do
Hold on
wonder
just a
where.
second. Would you mind shutting that door right there? Because I can't hear what is being said. Anyway, I'm all right. Just one more time, if you wouldn't mind. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. I don't want to. I don't want to get in trouble, Kevin. I'm sure you're not worried with the free graces, and I've been guilty of it myself. I absolutely admit it. But I've heard a lot of nastiness from free graces generally, and I'm wondering where the grace is in the free grace theology. I'm not hearing it. I'm not seeing it. If you know what I mean.
So, if I could, for a second, I guess share my screen again real quick. Let me go back
Yeah.
to present, share screen, go back to the entire screen, and all right. When you have an ideology that is propositionally centric, like what we have over here, propositionally centric. So free grace is propositionally centric. Provisionism is propositionally centric. Calvinism is propositionally centric. What happens is you have this. Like, it doesn't matter what the content is. Doesn't matter if it's Grudem or Harwood. You have confirmation bias, lack of viewpoint diversity, suppression of dissent, polarization and tribalism, loss of critical thinking, intolerance of alternative views, erosion of academic freedom, ideological echo chambers, inhibition of institutionalized disconfirmation. Like, how do we re-vet all of our ideas and really make sure they're still true? Moral absolutism, identity politics, intellectual stagnation, ideological extremism, suppression of diversity, suppression of dissent, lack of empathy, all right, this trouble you're getting from the free gracers, authoritarianism, group polarization, dehumanization of opponents, ideological dogmatism, groupthink, inflexibility and rigidity, polarization and divisiveness, intolerance and discrimination, ideological purity tests, cult-like behavior, loss of individuality, emotional manipulation, witch hunts, heresy hunters. So And I know that's quite a list for me to just read off like that, but it's very important that people see this, because when people are in an ideology that is propositionally normative, it doesn't matter if it's Calvinism or provision. It doesn't matter how true or correct the people think the content is. It actually doesn't matter how true or correct the content is. When it's propositionally normative, even if all the content was 100% correct, then this is the fruit. These 31 things, some of these are duplicated, I understand that. So this about 30 things here is what you get when you have propositionally normative ideology and in groups based on that. And you don't get a choice. You don't get to say, well, we at provisionism don't like those 30 things, so we're against them. No, you're not. You are creating them. You are in favor of them. You are precipitating them by being in an in group that is propositionally normative. You don't get to opt out of these things. If you're propositionally normative, this is what you are supporting, even if you're too ignorant to realize that this is what you're supporting.
How do you step out of that? And like, even if it doesn't matter what group, as you said, read those things there.
Yeah.
How are they going to come out of that bias? They perhaps don't perceive themselves in those terms there.
So that's,
and yet I can see it. I've never had honestly, Kevin, I mean, I did 30 years clink. I've always hated labeling, because that's all they ever do when you're in jail. The psychology, probation, the screws. They want to stick a label on you. They've accused me of being rigid as well, because I'm not malleable.
Right.
That's why I did 30 instead of like. So how do you step out of that? And I mean, I'm not into psychology. I've got no time for it.
Well, that question, that's the hard question. I don't know. Like, as a matter of fact, today when a friend of mine said that he, passed from darkness to waking up, my big question for him is what did that? Like, I wouldn't know how to go back to my previous self and wake me up. I wouldn't know how to do that, because my previous self had all kinds of reasons to assign me to sin, hell, the devil, and demons and everything else for the things that I'm realizing now. So I already had, like, what you might call anti-memes and anti-meme complexes against the things that I needed. It's like a second grader being trained and taught to be against everything they would learn in the third and fourth grade. So you never, and then of course, by the time you get to college and you're learning advanced physics, of course, that's really, that's Satanism right there. And so everything has been, it's difficult. So my understanding is there's basically three great paths. As a matter of, what, I have this slideshow here. So in the Bible, here's what happens. I can actually just write this out. Here's the pattern that we found in Scripture. If I share my screen, share entire screen, the pattern that we found by comparing all of Paul's writings is that there's something that we're calling the golden chain of charity in Romans 5:1-5. You start with faith. That's the point of access. And then you have tribulations, patience, experience, hope. And then you arrive one day. I've arrived, not like that, but you come to this place where one day you develop love as a capacity. And that's where this is. Love, up here you have love as an intention, but you don't know how to love. And if we define love as that which enables choice, or the affordance of choice, then you want to afford choice to yourself and others when you start your journey, but you don't know how. And as you comes through some of these tribulations and patience and experience with hope, then you develop the love as a capacity. And then now the problem here is that the tribulations and the experience, what that is you have voluntarily adopted responsibility up here, and down here you get betrayed. And I guess I'm going to write a B for betrayal, and then you get injustice. You get betrayal and injustice. And it's very important at that point that you pay very close attention to Ephesians 4:32. And be ye kind one to another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. We think these are all just words. Why would you have to forgive somebody if they haven't done something absolutely terrible to you? Right? If you're supposed to be more like God, and God is a forgiving God, how can you become like God if there isn't a need to forgive people? And how bad does that forgiveness need to be? Well, how about they betray you for 30 pieces of silver, and then they send you to an illegal court trial, then they nail you on a cross? How'd that make you feel? Probably not too good. So the message of the cross is foolishness to people because they're fine with somebody else dying for them long ago and far away. Jesus did all the dying for me. But when you realize that believing in Christ means that you are going to go through this same pattern over and over in your life too, that's too much for people to bear. And that's why the cross of Christ is too heavy to bear. But it's through that failure. You voluntarily adopted responsibility. You're doing everything right. You suffer injustice and betrayal and the failure of that responsibility that you've adopted. And that's the thing that wakes you up. And now once you wake up, you see something. Now, do I face this with bitterness and resentment? That's the path to hell. Or do I face this with gratitude, love, and forgiveness and continued adoption of responsibility? That's the harder thing to do, but that is the path to transformation. And because, resentment in the cosmos of the mind, because everything is fractal, the devil is resentment in the cosmos of the mind. The devil's the father of lies, and resentment is the father of lies in the mind. That is what will get you to justify any narrative that bolsters your reasons, justifies your reasons for resentment, because you just want to hate that person. And the more you do that, the more you get out of touch with reality, and the more you become basically a self-induced psychosis where you're no longer in touch with reality at all, but you have this fake reality built up where you've retold the entire story of reality around you because of all the people that have been unjust to you and all the things they have coming to them. And so that's not a good place to be. So when you have a moment of catastrophe and horribleness, you can either become a bitter old man and your life has become a proverbial hell, or you can face it with, Jesus says, love your enemies, do good to them which hate you and despitefully use you and persecute you, and pray for them. If you actually do that, be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another. If you actually do that, I think that's an actual prescription for waking up. And then at that point, pursue the love, pursue the responsibility, get rid of the bitterness and resentment, and then you can move on to growing up, cleaning up, and showing up. And so some people say there's 3 great paths to waking up or to a higher level of consciousness, which does not equate necessarily to a higher level of capacity. And they would be great learning, great love, or great suffering. Well, because we grew up in America and you're in Western society too, even though you're in the UK, we don't really have access to great learning. We really don't have access to great love. The only thing we have access to is great suffering. So when that happens, you better get the love and the learning that should come with it. Otherwise, it's downhill from there. No more transformation for you. And that's where Hebrews chapter 6, verse 4 through 6 comes in. If you get that chance, if you get that waking up, and then you turn it down, you decide to resent to bitterness anyway, no more transformation for you. You're done. You crucified the Son of God afresh in your mind. You have to realize that you're the one that falsely accused Jesus. You're the one that betrayed him. You're the one that nailed him on the cross. And as soon as you start thinking you're justified and you're just to be in your resentment against people, you're going back to being the crucifier of Jesus. And it doesn't work that way. So, the pattern, and I've like this, what you're seeing on the screen here, I just learned this in the past 2 weeks. So this is, I'm not getting this out of a systematic theology somewhere. This is coming straight from our study on Colossians and comparing it with everything else Paul wrote. And they're all at these different phases. And you could actually map out perhaps like the Corinthians would be up here and the Romans would be somewhere maybe over here, and the Ephesians are still pre-love. Something I found out today while studying this, and the Colossians are post-love. They have the love and they're ready for wisdom cultivation. But the Ephesians and the Romans and the Corinthians aren't, even though the Romans and the Ephesians are further along than the Corinthians. So a Calvinist You think of the Corinthians, I'm of Paul, I'm of Apollos, the provisionists, the free grace people, they're back here. They're back here with the Corinthians. There are divisions and strife and envyings among you. I'm of Paul, I'm of Apollos. You're at carnal. I fed you with milk and not with meat. You could not, hitherto you were not able to bear it, and you're not able to bear it now. That's where all those ideological people are. And so what do we have to do with these people? We have to find some way to get them to move forward in this plan of getting people to love as a capacity so that they can wake up, so that they're ready for wisdom cultivation. And anybody who's ideologically possessed, such as Calvinists, provisionists, or free grace people, they're back here with the Corinthians. And I'm not saying that I know how to pull them out, but I am saying that I know that they need to be pulled out. And it's, I was there once, and I'm not trying, it sounds really arrogant. I know how arrogant that sounds, but I'm just thinking of where I was to where I am now. And it's very, very different. And I wouldn't even know how to go back and talk to my previous self. But I do think that we have kind of a path laid out in scripture for what this looks like.
Well, you've got experiential knowledge, haven't you, Kevin? We all have of certain things. Love is the key there. I mean, I don't want to be shaped by other people's attitude towards me. I do try and be loving. I'm not very good at it. It's quite hard. It's very hard, a very hard lesson to learn. There's a couple of comments in the side chat here.
Yeah, so Roman Omen says, and he's one of the guys that's in our FSI group on Wednesday nights, and very, very insightful individual here. All the issues with ideology also do apply to everything outside Christianity. Christianity isn't a vacuum to the rest of the world, separated in categories. So what you'll see this, so I'm really glad he pointed that out, because that's absolutely right. You'll see this in politics. Anywhere where you can have an ideology. You'll see it, like I work in the IT industry. Okay, I do cybersecurity remediation compliance for a healthcare company. And so what you'll see is various different opinions on what should be done, and people get egoically attached to them. You see the same kinds of things there too that you see in politics, that you see in religion. So it's what the human mind tends to do, which is why psychology is important. It doesn't really matter that the content is or isn't religion, even though there's a whole bunch of excuse to bring moralism and sanctimony to double down on our stupidity and ignorance when it is in religion.
Yeah, I've noticed it. I mean, I've done courses in electronics and stuff, and you come across people who will just, talk down to you and all that stuff, whatever. Yeah,
I know
you
better
get
than
that.
you.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Make them wash gay feet. I don't think that's going to help with humility. I don't know.
You know what that's from? You know what that's from, Bob?
What?
There was a video in there was a commercial back in the Super Bowl, I think, and they were showing those "He Gets Us" videos, I think, about Jesus. He gets us, and they had all kinds of people relating to other people who weren't like them, and I think they had at the end somebody who was a priest or a clergy member who was washing the feet of somebody who appeared to be homosexual. So and how would you know? You're stereotyping if they appeared to be. Just don't think that. Don't go there. Let's just. So anyway, this phrase has been floating around this little corner of the internet for a while here, because of all that. And so it's a little joke call out to that Super Bowl commercial. I think when people say, I believe the Bible and the Bible only, obviously this only seems to really matter in the sense that they're saying that they want to be as oriented to the Bible as possible. I think when they say that, I think they're making a moralistic claim, and that when they say that, they are completely ignorant of a large majority of the 788,257 words that are in the Bible.
Yeah. I've learned, I mean, this is just my experience, Kevin. It's not an excuse. I can't think of a better name for my YouTube channel. But I just sort of sat there and I thought, well, if they're going to attack me, they can either attack me or they can attack the King James Bible and its contents. And I don't know. If somebody's got a better username for my channel, I really would want to. But I do want to encourage people to get the KJV rather than the NIV, NASB, LSB, and all the others, HCSB.
LSB, yeah.
You know, honestly, I'm really stuck.
So let me ask you this, okay? I've been King James only all my life. So
All right, okay.
what is it that makes what's the fruit of reading the King James Bible as opposed to the other versions? What does it do for the individual? How does it make them more like Christ? Like if I'm walking around in the grocery store, what am I going to notice about a person that's going in their behavior that tells me they're King James only versus the other guy who's reading the NIV?
Nothing's going to indicate that. Is it?
Yeah.
There isn't going to be anything illustrating that I'm King James only until I open my mouth and they start coming out with NIV stuff or something.
Okay, so let's try something else then. What if we go into what if you're interacting with people at a secular job? Let's say you all work at a lumber plant and one day you have a company picnic and you're interacting with people and nobody talks about religion, but some of the people are King James only and they're all Christians. They just happen to be, but nobody's talking about religion. And nobody talks about religion at all, but some of them are King James only and some of them aren't. What behavioral differences am I going to see at work and at the company picnic of those who are and those who aren't?
I'm not sure you would see any differences in behaviour generally if if they're truly following Christ. I wouldn't say that because somebody's using the NIV that they're not following Christ, they're not after Christ. I would just think it was unfortunate that they're using the NIV, really. But I don't think there'd be any marked difference.
So why is it important then?
Good question. It
I'm
became
asking
important
this
to
as a
me
person who's been
because
King James only all my life.
oh yeah. I don't mind. I did when I first got saved. I was shown things mainly from the NIV by Gordon. This was at Full Sutton Jail.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, he kept mentioning the King James Bible. The King James Bible says it better here, says it better there, blah blah. I thought, Gordon, get me a King James Bible. And once I got my King James in 1992, I never stopped reading because I thought, well, I've got where the rubber meets the road here. And I started learning things about the KJV, more so since I got out with YouTube,
Yeah,
other videos and things. And I've had people attacking me verbally, not physically, because I use the KJV. Oh, it's this, it's that, and the Catholics hate it. I've read the dedicatory epistle at the beginning, the letter to the king, their attitude to KJV. So I've sort of dug in with it.
yeah,
And nobody's ever going to change me from KJV.
yeah.
I got more from it than I would from the NIV. The NIV now, it just reads completely wrong to me. It just doesn't.
So
I'm not.
there's a phrase that I can't remember where this comes from, but I've heard it from some cognitive science where they say, "Don't tell me what you believe. Show me how you have transformed."
Yeah, you've said that a few times on your channel, haven't you? Yeah, that's right. Show us how you're being transformed. Okay, you're a big King James follower. What is that? And somebody else made that point today. What has it done to your life? How have your behaviour as such? I don't mean works. How has that improved? What's your growth? How have you grown thereby?
Yeah, so what I had to come to terms with ultimately, like I came up independent Baptist, and the kind of independent Baptist I was everybody's King James only. Now I found King James onlyism for myself when we were in a Southern Baptist church, and I encountered some people who challenged me on manuscript evidence. So I
Right.
started studying the manuscript evidence when I was 16. started looking into everything that I could find. The internet was still kind of new at the time, but I was buying books. I was driving to Pensacola. I was buying books, getting a hold of everything I could about what was in each manuscript and what the superior manuscripts were and what the translation mechanisms were, and formal equivalence versus dynamic equivalence and all this stuff. And so I really didn't care about the issue a whole lot until I started studying it for myself. And then I came to the conclusion that the party line that all the major denominations were saying about the Bible versions was nothing other than a party line. And when I examined the evidence for myself, I'm like, yeah, it's very clear that this is a really interesting issue that needs to be looked into, and people need to take this more seriously because these Bibles are very different. They are different in over 30,000 places. There are 17 verses missing from the. There are 17 verses completely missing from the New Testament of the NIV and the ESV. They're just completely gone. And then the NASB, those same 17 verses are put in brackets with marginal notes saying that they're not in the oldest and best manuscripts. Well, then there's a lot of difference about what the oldest and best manuscripts are. And so, like the latest version of the Nestle-Aland Greek Testament is NA28. I think it came out in 2012. And it added 400 readings from the Textus Receptus back into NA28. But all of the Bible versions that are out there that aren't King James are still NA27 without those 400 readings in them. And then, so in addition to that, in addition to those 17 missing complete verses, just in the New Testament, there's 229 missing partial verses. For example, if you look up Luke 4:4 in the King James, it says, "But by every word of God. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word of God." And that phrase, "but by every word of God," is removed from the other versions. Like Acts 8:37 is not in the NIV or the ESV. Matthew 18:21 or Matthew 18:11, Matthew 17:21. They do funny things with 1 John 5:7, where they take out verse 7 from the King James and split verse 8 into two verses.
Yeah, so, I've heard about that one. Yeah, it's a massive subject though, that, Kevin. I did get materials on it. I didn't go into it blindly. It's very difficult in jail to get information and stuff. The libraries are usually garbage, even more so now, I think. But I mean, textual criticism. I mean, that's just.
I'm coming up against a time break that I'm going to have to go real quick here. So if there's anything, I hate to do that, but if there's anything we need to say to wrap up,
you've got to go, have you, Kevin?
Yeah, I'm going to have to go soon.
Okay. Is there anything that you would want to bring up, or anything in the side chat you want to address?
Let's see here. A lot of stuff from Jamie. Todd Clark says, "Is there any issue with the NKJV?" So the NKJV was Thomas Nelson's attempt to get the revised version of 1881 readings into King James reading people's minds. Is the non-charitable way King James only people put it. There are some significant differences, but especially if you compare like Job, Psalms, and Proverbs, they're very different. And I think, well, I don't want to make any stipulation, but it seems like they resort back to Kittle's Hebrew instead of going with the Masoretic text that the King James uses. So, I mean, there are some significant differences, but they are more subtle in that one. Let's see what else we have in here.
Could you recommend a book on the subject, Kevin? I don't mind being challenged on it and looking into it deeper.
There are some books written by Douglas Stouffer. And I think he's got a couple. He's got one called One Book, One Authority. If you want to dig into that, I think that's kind of interesting. There are several.
Staufer.
STAU. I think that's right. Yeah, right. Doug Stouffer. Yeah. So he's got some stuff on it. Now I have stopped being. Oh, I don't even know if I want to go there. Anyway, so if you want to read up on it, I would probably start with his stuff. There's so many books on it, but I would probably start with Doug Stouffer's stuff. One Book, One Authority. maybe. But anyway, now I don't want anybody to think that I endorse everything he says. But I'm also at the point now where if I don't know if I could say it. Some things are just hard to say, especially when you're in a time crunch. But there comes a point in time where when you have been when you've seen the view for yourself, you no longer need to ask other people to describe it for you, if that makes sense. So yeah.
Right. Well, I'm sorry to see you go, Kevin. I do appreciate you coming over.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking me. And sorry, like right now I'm in Baton Rouge, so we have a hurricane over us right now, literally right now. And I don't know if I'm surprised that we still have power, knock on wood, but I am happy that we still have power. And
Have you
I
got a
hope that
bunker to
continues.
go in? Have you
What's
got a
that?
bunker? Have you got a bunker to get into?
Yeah. Well, we're gonna get into the office in the closet in my wife's office. There's no windows there. But yeah, well, I think we're gonna be okay.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. We don't want to lose you. We don't want to lose you, Kevin. Definitely not. Right.
All right.
So, God bless you. Thank you for coming over.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bob, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Right, that was Kevin Thompson, obviously. A big storm over in Baton Rouge. I don't know what. Yeah, I've never been in a storm like you get over there. Wouldn't want to be. Right. Thanks for coming over, Jamie. Right, I'm gonna go. Yeah. It's 1:20 in the morning here. Look, just in case any of you think I hate free graces or I hate free grace, no, I don't.